Oh, what does it look like? Hello, everybody. I had the opportunity and the privilege today to speak with Mr. Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of Canada's Federal Conservative Party, but also, barring catastrophe and God willing, Canada's next Prime Minister. A transition in power in this country is likely to take place sometime between March and October or November of 2025. And it appears very probable that Pierre Poilievre is the heir presumptive and will be the next Prime Minister of Canada. And so I talked to Mr. Poilievre 2.5 years ago, which was quite shocking to me. I thought it had been more recently than that. And a lot has transpired in the meantime. What did I talk about with Pierre? Well, I think mostly what I did was give Canadians and people on the international side a chance to see who this man is. In an hour and a half of discussion and the extra half an hour on the Daily Wire side, you have enough time to get a sense of how someone responds spontaneously and emotionally and cognitively to complex and challenging questions in a manner that's not rehearsed. That's the huge advantage of the podcast format. We talked about all the stories that Mr. Poilievre has heard in his thousands of event interactions with Canadians in industrial settings, in manufacturing settings, in academic settings, so that he could inform himself about the true situation that's facing Canadians struggling to make ends meet, despite their best efforts now, which is a dismal reality in Canada with its excessive housing prices and diminishing economy. Most importantly, perhaps, what is his vision of the future that...
Here, I've only seen parts of this interview, and let me tell you exactly what's going to happen. They're going to talk about culture war nonsense from the perspective of like a right-wing YouTuber. Okay? As though this guy's literally like an anti-woke Marvel fan or something. They're even going to... I know the fact that they bring up freedom of speech in Canada, which I think is really funny because it doesn't exist, but that's like hilarious. That's how Americanized they are, that they forget that like they're not running for office in America. They will then have at least a couple moments where Jordan Peterson has the funniest ad break segue. I suspect that will also happen. Yeah, wokeism. Pierre Poilievre says Canadians are too obsessed with race because of wokeism and agrees with Jordan Peterson that Canada essentially had to invent and import racism because it didn't exist here before recent decades. Amazing.
Both threatens and provides opportunity for Canadians. How is it possible for the citizens of this great country to dig themselves out of the malaise and pit that has been dug for them and by them over the last 9 years? And what could be done to remove the impediments such that this country could become the dynamic industrial powerhouse that it certainly could easily become? So join us for all that. So, sir, it's been almost 2.5 years since we sat down to talk the time before. So I guess the first thing I'd like to know is, what have you been doing during that time? I'd like to hear about your day-to-day schedule and your week-to-week schedule. Like, lay out your job.
Basically, we have two parts to my professional life. It's very bifurcated. There's the Parliament Hill side, which is early morning meeting with my leadership team, House Leader, Deputy Leader, Whip, etc., to plan out the day, the battle plan for our parliamentary committees, question period, etc. That is punctuated by one weekly caucus meeting and just the daily prosecution of the government, which is the quintessential role of an opposition leader. And then the other part to my life is touring. I asked my assistant today how many events we had done over the last year, and he said it was exactly 600. I mean, a few weeks ago it was 507.
So that means this guy, instead of doing any sort of governance, has been running for office for at least the past 2 years. This dude has been running for office. He's been doing campaign rallies or for the last year, twice a day. Now, I don't... Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm no big city lawyer. and certainly not a big city lawyer in Canada. But I'm pretty sure Canadian laws have some written in the books against that sort of thing. Right? Are you allowed to rally, to do political rallies in Canada this far ahead of an election? I thought that there was, in countries like Canada that are a little bit more responsible, not one bit. No. I thought that like in countries like Canada, there are limitations to when, how, and where you can rally. Like there's a time frame, usually in European countries at least, where you can actually run for office. Oh, there's no, what is this? No, there are specific rules that you can rally, like signs on the lawn, specific time before election. It's kind of a gray area. They can't put up signs and stuff, but I'm guessing they can say this isn't a rally for office. Okay.
70 something. So we've done 600 events, and those are like tours at mills, mines, factories, farms, high-tech facilities. And we tour in, see how the place operates. Then I give a short speech, do a question and answer, and then I just mull about and shake hands with the workers for 25 minutes to an hour. And then I go on to the next stop and do it all over again. And we did that in 9 provinces and 2 territories this year. And so that's a summary of my workload and work plan to do my job.
And you said 600 events. You made allusion when we were driving over here that the weekends are particularly packed, that you'll do like 10 events on Saturday or Sunday.
Right.
And so what, a typical event, what do you enjoy about the events? Why are they useful? And what do you learn?
Well, first of all, you get a practical insight into how the country actually works. Mm-hmm. Like who makes the widgets? How do those get made? How do...
Yeah, okay. Immediately, once you start talking about widgets, like when you use the term widget, automatically you're a freaking econ nerd, okay? You didn't actually ever have a job. And from what I understand, what Chatters was saying, he literally never did have a job. He just, at the age of 32, went into office. Immediately, that's an econ Andy, okay? Nobody who has actually worked a real job is like, oh, you find the widgets. He's been at MP since 26? Since 26? Oh my God.
How does our supply chain come together? What skill sets do these incredible workers have? What background qualified them to be a licensed welder, or to run a CNC machine, or to be the CEO of a 300-person company that supplies parts into the American economy? And that practical insight, I think, is important if you want to lead a government and a national economy. So you learn a lot. Then I get to hear the stories of the people who work in these places and get their feedback on what they want, what their dreams and aspirations are.
Yeah, I want to turn to that in some detail. Let me ask you about the parliamentary side too, because I think it'd be useful for people to know how you prepare for what you do in Parliament. It isn't obvious to me that people exactly understand the business of being in opposition, at a really practical level.
Right.
What do you see as your major function? I know you're there to push back against the government and to question and criticize, but it isn't obvious how you go about preparing for that, or how you decide what issues you're going to focus on and how you distribute the response.
Okay, I don't care about this. All right, let's get to the good stuff.
Okay, so there's a lot of distrust, generally speaking, in relationship to, I would say, establishment organizations and political elites all across the West.
Yeah, but this guy is very different. He's not a political elite. He's a guy who touched the widgets at the widget factory.
A lot of that well-earned. Why should Canadians believe that the vision that you just laid out is something that you hold personally dear and not merely a set of carefully calculated?
Some people say this guy's an economist, but he wanted to put Canada entirely on crypto back in 2022. In a pitch to no, you don't understand. That was Pierre with the glasses on. This is a different Pierre. You don't understand. That's the old him, bro. That's when he was at the widget factory. In a pitch to cryptocurrency investors, Poilievre, Polar Bear, says he wants Canada to be the blockchain capital of the world. Amazing. You actually aren't wrong. He just looks like a different person. I mean, he still looks like a dweeb now, but he at least looks less of a dweeb.
And it will be hard because the temptation will be, this is the mistake that conservative parties around the world have made countless times. They think, well, anybody who's got a conservative mindset is already voting for me, so I can go off and chase the ideas of my political opponents, and then everyone will love me because I'll have the conservatives due to the fact that I have the name conservative, and then I'll have all these other people because I've embraced their contrary direction. And in the short term, it works because you manage to have all of these people under, and all of the different political ideologies captured in one tent. But the problem happens when the policies are a disaster. And then people wake up and go, oh my God, my taxes are now up, the inflation is out of control, the deficit is spiraling, there's crime on the streets. So does the temptation exist to try and take on the political policies of the socialists in the short term? Sure, but it's one that I will fiercely resist because I know that by the 4th year of my mandate, people would be enraged because their lives would be even worse. So
yeah, you don't care about that. You're a conservative, so that's obviously what you're gonna do. Anyway, look, as far as I understand, in the most reductive ways possible, aside from the usual things that liberals do, which is not address the actual harm that people are experiencing, even though you ran on a relatively aggressive, like anti-wealthy tax the corporations campaign, you kind of cut that aside. There are some minor improvements, or at least like some semblance of like rational governance there. If you talk about climate change, you do carbon taxes, which of course these assholes are going to get really mad about and talk about how Canada should be the leader of oil and gas exports around the planet, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, it's always too little and too late from the liberal side. And the grievances that mounted against Justin Trudeau came from his goofy nature, his overall incompetence, and almost identical problems that were faced, that the Canadian society was facing, that Justin Trudeau basically operated in the almost identical way that the Democratic Party operates, including but not limited to, I think his like signature achievements are funding Ukraine, I guess. Like funding Ukrainian funding, doing NATO, but this time not in a Joe Brandon kind of way, but in a Justin Trudeau style way, and also legalizing weed, $10 a day daycare. But basically everybody hates immigrants, think that like he brought in more migrants, ruined the housing market by bringing in immigrants, and also caused inflation, even though America was the number one at dealing with inflation amongst the OECD nations, and then Canada was number 2 at dealing with inflation amongst other OECD nations. It doesn't really matter. People were understandably very upset. So yeah, it's almost identical to America in many ways, it feels like. What? Are you going to cover how your crazy nation is leaking and Musk is now getting his teeth into the UK? Yes, I will. It's really messed up.
Dangers, and they want safety again. And then you have business owners that are saying there's just no way to continue to compete in Canada. We have to look at moving, and that means the next 200 jobs we create is going to be in Ohio or Florida or some other place than Canada. That's the kind of overview that I get.
Except we have healthcare and abortion is legal for now. Yeah, you have healthcare for now as well. Canadian healthcare should be seen as living on borrowed time. Okay? Just the way I see it, from where I'm standing, from what the provinces have done so far, Canadian healthcare is also living on borrowed time. I think Canadian healthcare goes away before the NHS is the NHS falls apart. Didn't you say the same thing about the UK after Boris won? Wait. I did. Please tell me how I was wrong. Did you bring that up as a own? I mean, we're living in it. What are you talking about? You can't say that. You can't say that as like, dude, you were so wrong about Boris Johnson when you're living in the world that you can't undermine my predictions by pointing to how correct I was. You said after Boris got elected, UK would privatize healthcare. I did say that. I said UK would move towards privatizing healthcare by crippling and undermining the existing aspects of the NHS, and that Boris Johnson, despite the fact that despite the fact that he ran on funding healthcare, would not end up doing so. I was right. Unless you think I meant that Boris Johnson was going to completely undermine, like, no more NHS. Like, Boris Johnson was going to nuke the NHS. I don't think so. It's virtually impossible to dismantle universal healthcare program in Canada. The popularity of it, despite the underfunding, is too high. Canadians want healthcare reform, but they do not want to get rid of public healthcare. At most, they are okay with clinics that provide specialized services outside the public realm. That's how it starts. Obviously, that's bad, but it's nowhere near borrowed time. No, that's how it starts. That's literally how it starts. That's how it works. You go for specialized care, then it's like general practitioners. We just simply don't have enough of them. Sorry. No funding to any of the areas of need so that private healthcare can be a competitive product, and inevitably you get people used to it. You create there's already obviously a secondary market of insurance to begin with, but any country that has some semblance of social safety nets will always seek to undermine it, but you can't do it in one day. It's ridiculous. There's no way to ruin it in one day. You would never be able to. It's far too popular. Every politician understands, whether they are for or against social safety nets. Every population understands. Once you put in any sort of social safety nets, it takes decades to undermine it. Because once people take it, they take it for granted. They're like, what do you mean? This is my thing. You gave this to me. I'm not letting you have it back. That's why America has been so good at refusing to offer anything since the 80s. That's why it's much easier here to consistently advocate to cut taxes, because you're like, well, the government is not providing anything for me. Why am I giving money to it? Is the commonly held opinion in this country. Starving the beast. The devastating impact of Reaganomics. I think chatters are coping. My family doctor and all the family doctors are still paid the same amount per patient visit now as they were 20 years ago. Tell me that's sustainable in any way. 20 years, no funding increases. We're definitely cooked. They're just going to wait till people get more desperate before they chop its head off. Yeah. That's how it works. That's how it works in general. You refuse to add additional funds to desperately to underfunded social safety nets that are in dire need of extra funds. And then you cut side deals by way of lobbyists to the private sector that want to create private healthcare. you first implement private healthcare as a last act, a last ditch effort to save the crippling healthcare infrastructure. This is to save the existing social safety nets. This is to save the existing socialized medicine. You don't understand. These doctors, they're too overwhelmed. That's why we need these private healthcare facilities. And then you continue undermining and underfunding public healthcare, and more private facilities keep propping up until it's basically nothing. I know this from tracking the American public schooling system. Okay. I mean, also, we've just never really had like a fully flushed out socialized medicine structure in this country. I believe since like post World War II, we have always had healthcare tied to your employment. And initially it was so that companies could have a competitive advantage over one another by offering additional quote unquote benefits. But we've never really had that. Sweden is a great example of what they did in terms of privatization initiatives in the schooling sector, which they went back on. I don't know if they have actually continued undermining it, but this is the most significant factor that this is the most significant damage that social democracies inevitably face, which is that as long as capital accumulation still exists, as long as there's an opportunity to farm out profits, private enterprise is always going to work throughout. Private enterprise is always going to work throughout time, across decades, if that's how long it takes to consistently undermine anything that the government is doing, advocate for austerity, cripple these programs beyond repair, and then come in as the private savers of said programs. Sometimes it happens, like in the Thatcher era, it happens way faster than you would expect with like public transit. If you look at public transit in the UK, a lot of these things, a lot of these like government funded projects were handed off to the private sector, and obviously the consumer suffered for it. Like people who use and rely on public transit suffered as a consequence of that. Here in Canada, the only ones that benefit from free healthcare are people on welfare and disability. What do you mean? You are 100% correct. They do that in Sweden a lot as well. They cut free dental recently from 23 to 19, for example. What do you mean? They also keep underfunding the healthcare system in general, and they say, look, it's not working. We need to privatize it. It's a classic move. I mean, yeah, this is another one. I worked on the privatization of England's water in 1989. It was an organized ripoff. Taxpayers lost out. Consumers have paid through the nose since. This failed regime is long past its sell-by date. Jonathan Portes is a professor of economics and public policy at King's College London and a former civil servant. This is about the privatization of England's water. They make it worse with privatization. They use privatization as the solution and make it even worse, but companies are making record sales. Yeah, but in that time frame, your GDP goes up, okay? Your gross domestic product goes up. I mean, let me tell you, one thing that the GDP loves, the number machine loves, is costly middle managers that don't actually do anything, but simply have to be hired and have to get paid, and also can add additional points of seeking out profit to the process. America is not the shining beacon of hope and prosperity at the end of the road. It is actually a glaringly obvious warning sign for many of these countries. And yet, for some weird reason, nobody seems to understand that. Even if they do make fun of our dumbasses and our brain rot and our conservative movement and say, wow, these guys are so crazy. Why are they like this? It doesn't make sense. They don't understand that, like, what's happening here is inevitably going to happen in your country. Even the pervasive influence of lobbying. Also, not dissimilar to the Democrats is this thing I saw, which I love. I saw that liberal sources had told Global News they felt Trudeau had pulled the party too far to the left, and they seemed to think that it was the problem with his leadership. Are they going to put, like, Freeland in charge or something? Is that what's going to happen? Like, they want like a... They're treating Justin Trudeau as though he's like a Corbyn head. What is this? NewsYCombinator.com. What is this? The GDP joke? Two economists are walking in a forest. They come across a pile of shit. The first economist says to the other, I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of shit. The second economist takes the $100 and eats the pile of shit. They continue walking until they come across a second pile of shit. The second economist turns to the first. I say, I'll pay you $100 to eat that pile of shit. The first economist takes it. Walking a little more, the first economist looks at the second and says, you know, I gave you $100 to eat that shit. And then you gave back to me the same $100 to eat shit. I can't help but feel like we both just ate shit for nothing. That's not true, responded the second economist. We increased the GDP by $200. This is the nerdiest joke, but it's, yes. You absolutely butchered this joke. Oh my God. I mean, I just read it from a forum. What are you talking about? Oh my God. None of the above, 22%. Chrystia Freeland is 19%. Mark Carney at 14%. Melanie Jolly at 4%. Christy Clark at 4%. This is very bad news for the Liberal Party. Most of the people included are big political names and established records. That the winner is none of these losers is devastating for the Liberals. That's crazy that Chrystia Freeland is the most popular out of all of the recognizable names within liberal leadership candidates. That is devastating for the country. Man. Carney is Trudeau's finance guru. I can't believe he's thinking about running. What is that? I don't know what this is. What is that a sign for? I don't know enough about Canadian politics. Symbol for Dialogon, an extremist FR group. Diagolon is a white supremacist group in Canada. That's PP at the Freedom Convoy. Nice. Well, he wants to be an American. What's more American than an American-funded trucker convoy? Maybe we will annex Canada after all. I don't know. Maybe they're doing fifth fifth column style infiltration. Maybe we're already there by way of Canada's very own Texas, Alberta. We've already assumed the reins of control. I'm going back to Uzbekistan, bro.